The rise of the Portuguese Empire. This is a map of the world's shipping lanes, the intricate network of maritime routes that power global trade today. Some of these routes, like those through the Suez and Panama Canals, are modern constructions. But most of these oceanic highways trace their origins back centuries, to a time when sailors had no advanced technology to guide them. Navigation relied on local knowledge, the stars, and the simplest of maps. Just over 500 years ago, at the dawn of the 16th century, these global trade networks didn't even exist. Their creation was driven largely by one small nation on the western edge of Europe, Portugal. Through daring voyages, innovative navigation, and sheer ambition, Portugal transformed itself into the first true maritime superpower. Within a few decades, the Portuguese built an empire stretching from Africa to Asia and South America. Their maritime exploits not only filled the royal treasury, but also laid the foundation for the interconnected global economy we live in today. Foundations of a kingdom. The Kingdom of Portugal emerged out of the Reconquista, the centuries-long struggle by Christian states to reclaim Iberian lands from Muslim rule. By the mid-12th century, Portugal had established itself as a sovereign kingdom. In 1249, the Portuguese completed their conquest of the Algarve in the south, securing borders that remain almost unchanged to this day. With their territory safe from outside threats and relations with neighboring Castile relatively stable, Portugal turned its gaze outward, toward the sea and the opportunities it offered. Ceuta and the first step overseas. A turning point came in 1415, when Portuguese forces captured the North African city of Ceuta from the Marinid Sultanate. While it appeared at first to be another episode in the Christian-Muslim wars, Ceuta became something far more significant: Portugal's first overseas foothold. From this base, Portuguese ships could launch expeditions farther along the Atlantic coast of Africa. Prince Henry the Navigator and exploration. This age of exploration was driven above all by one man, Prince Henry the Navigator. Motivated by curiosity, strategy, and commerce, Henry sponsored countless voyages along the uncharted African coastline. His goal was twofold: to discover how far Muslim territories extended southward, and to find a sea route to Asia that would bypass the costly overland networks controlled by Arab and Venetian merchants. By the early 15th century, Portuguese sailors had sighted and colonized the islands of Madeira, 1419, and the Azores, 1427. In 1434, Gil Eanes broke through one of the great barriers to exploration, Cape Bojador, infamous for its violent waters. This feat opened the way for voyages deeper into sub-Saharan Africa, expanding southward. Over the next decades, Portuguese ships pushed further down the African coast. They reached the Cape Verde Islands in 1456, the Gulf of Guinea by the 1460s, and established forts and trading posts that secured their dominance in gold and slave commerce. To mark their claims, they left behind padros, stone crosses engraved with the royal coat of arms. The sea route to India. In 1488, Portuguese explorer Bartolomé Dias achieved a breakthrough. He rounded the southern tip of Africa, later named the Cape of Good Hope, and sailed into the Indian Ocean, proving that Asia could indeed be reached by an easterly route. But even this discovery was soon overshadowed. Just 4 years later, Christopher Columbus, sailing for Spain, crossed the Atlantic and stumbled upon the Americas, lands he mistakenly believed to be Asia. This created tensions between Spain and Portugal, as both sought to claim new territories. The conflict was resolved in 1494 by the Treaty of Tordesillas, which divided the world into two spheres of influence. Spain would claim lands to the west of a designated meridian, and Portugal those to the east. This agreement gave Portugal rights over Africa, Asia, and, unknowingly at the time, Brazil. Vasco da Gama and the opening of the East. With the treaty settled, Portugal finally pursued its long-desired eastern route. On July 8, 1497, Vasco da Gama departed Lisbon with 4 ships and 170 men. After a grueling 10-month voyage, he landed on the Malabar coast of India in May 1498. Pedro Alvarez Cabral, while crossing the Atlantic in 1500, sailed farther west than intended and unexpectedly reached the coast of present-day Brazil. Although often described as accidental, some historians speculate the Portuguese may have already known of Brazil's existence and were aware that it lay within their designated sphere of influence under the Treaty of Tordesillas. Cabral advised King Manuel I to settle the land, and follow-up expeditions were sent in 1501 and 1503. The region's abundance of Brazil wood, from which it later took its name, made it valuable, though the absence of gold or silver meant Portugal initially prioritized its profitable trade with India and Asia. During the early 16th century, Portuguese explorers pushed deeper into Asia, reaching Sri Lanka and Indonesia, the sources of cinnamon and nutmeg. These spices were so valuable that Afonso de Albuquerque, the first viceroy of Portuguese India, ordered the establishment of fortified trading posts across the 14,000-mile route from Lisbon to the East Indies. This vast network linked Africa, Arabia, India, Southeast Asia, China, and eventually Japan. Religion also played a role. Priests and Jesuit missionaries accompanied fleets, charged with spreading Catholicism. In some cases, they built strong relationships, such as in Nagasaki, founded in 1571. But elsewhere, conversion was imposed through violence, as in the Goa Inquisition, which brutally targeted Hindus. For decades, Asia and Africa remained the empire's primary focus. But by the 1530s, French traders began showing interest in Brazil. To counter this, King João III launched a colonization program in 1532, dividing Brazil into 15 hereditary captaincies. Only 2 flourished, thanks to sugarcane cultivation, which demanded vast amounts of labor. Enslaved Africans soon became the backbone of Brazil's economy. Of the 4 million Africans trafficked to the Americas between the 16th and 19th centuries, nearly 40% were sent to Brazil. Religion also played a role. Priests and Jesuit missionaries accompanied fleets, charged with spreading Catholicism. In some cases, they built strong relationships, such as in Nagasaki, founded in 1571. But elsewhere, conversion was imposed through violence, as in the Goa Inquisition, which brutally targeted Hindus. For decades, Asia and Africa remained the empire's primary focus. But by the 1530s, French traders began showing interest in Brazil. To counter this, King João III launched a colonization program in 1532, dividing Brazil into 15 hereditary captaincies. Only 2 flourished, thanks to sugarcane cultivation, which demanded vast amounts of labor. Enslaved Africans soon became the backbone of Brazil's economy. Of the 4 million Africans trafficked to the Americas between the 16th and 19th centuries, nearly 40% were sent to Brazil. The Dutch posed the greatest threat. Having won independence in 1581, they quickly targeted Portugal's lucrative spice routes. By the early 17th century, Dutch and English merchants had established rival bases in India, Sri Lanka, and Indonesia, sparking open conflict. The Dutch-Portuguese War, 1598 to 1663, was fought across Asia, Africa, and the Americas. Portugal lost key holdings, including parts of Sri Lanka, Malacca, and the Gold Coast of Africa. Though they repelled the Dutch in Brazil, the empire was severely weakened. Frustrated by Spain's neglect, Portugal restored its independence in 1640 under King John IV. Yet by then, their influence had diminished. The Dutch dominated Indonesia, while the English grew stronger in India. Increasingly, Brazil became Portugal's most important colony. The discovery of gold in Minas Gerais in 1693, followed by diamonds, triggered a gold rush that transformed Brazil. Within decades, hundreds of thousands migrated there, including enslaved Africans forced into mine labor. By the mid-18th century, gold made up nearly half of Brazil's exports, though sugar remained central to its economy. By the late 18th century, revolutionary ideas spread from America and France to Brazil. Discontent grew, but the decisive moment came in 1808 when Napoleon invaded Portugal, forcing the royal family to flee to Rio de Janeiro. In 1815, Brazil was elevated to a kingdom, sharing equal status with Portugal. This emboldened calls for independence, and in 1822, Dom Pedro, son of King João VI, declared Brazil an independent empire with himself as emperor. The loss of Brazil left Portugal with only scattered possessions in Africa and Asia. In the 19th century, the crown turned its focus to Angola and Mozambique. The ambitious Pink Map plan sought to connect the two territories across Africa, but Britain, by then the dominant global empire, blocked it with an ultimatum in 1890. Humiliated, Portugal abandoned the scheme, fueling unrest at home. World War I further exposed Portugal's weakness, as it struggled to defend its African colonies against German incursions. After the war, instability continued until 1933, when Antonio de Oliveira Salazar established the authoritarian Estado Novo regime. Neutral in World War II, Salazar clung to Portugal's colonies while global decolonization movements gained momentum. Tensions erupted in 1961. India annexed Goa, Daman, and Geo, ending Portuguese rule there. At the same time, independence movements in Angola, Mozambique, and Guinea-Bissau sparked the costly Portuguese colonial war, 1961 to 1974. Despite brutal repression, guerrilla fighters, supported by the Soviet Union, gradually wore down Portuguese forces. One of the longest-lived colonial empires in history had come to a close. Yet its legacy endures. Portuguese remains the language of over 250 million people across Europe, South America, Africa, and Asia. And the global maritime routes pioneered by Portugal's explorers continue to shape world trade more than 500 years later.